Welcome everybody, it's Rev. We're doing a tier list today, an Edison tier list. And you might be saying, Rev, why haven't you done an Edison tier list? Haven't you been playing this format for like 10 months? And I would say, yes, I have been playing it for about 10 months, but I just don't feel like I had an informed enough opinion on a lot of these decks or have played enough of these decks to really make a tier list. So here we are. I think I have played enough. Um, As a reminder, it's always helpful if you sub-a-dub-dub, subscribe, and support the channel. Share the video, whatever it is. Now, I have a few prefaces here. As you can see, here are the tier lists or the tiers. There's S, 1, 1.5, 2, and if we scroll down a little bit more, oh shit, I made an error. Sorry guys, I don't have an editor. Ass, ass. Always have to have an ass tier. So yeah, we're gonna go through this. A few other things I want to say before we get started. Um, I don't think the distance between tiers in this format is really all that big. Um, Between like at least S tier and tier one. Then there's like a little bit bigger of a gap between tier one and tier 1.5, and then a considerably larger gap below that. For a few reasons that I'm gonna get into. Um, But I don't think it's like GOAT format. Like I do think, at this point in GOAT format, there is a tier 0 deck and it's Chaos Turbo, and then everything else is substantially worse. And I know there are like GOAT format copers out there that, say, random decks win tournaments, but I think like before the fact, I just really do think that like the best deck with the knowledge you have, like on average, like has to be Chaos Turbo. It's so good. But that's not what we're here for. We are here for Edison. Um, And there's one or two decks that I have a little bit of uncertainty about, which we'll get into. Um, but let's just jump into it. I don't want to spend too much time on the really bad decks. Like I don't want to spend fucking 5 minutes talking about Flamville. It's ass. Let's just like do that. Like I mean, it's really not good. There are plenty of other decks that I think I can have some decent comments on. Machine of Gear, I think it's also very bad. Uh, let's save ourselves some time. So frogs. With frogs, I think Frog Hero is one of the best decks in the format. I think it's really, really good. And the other thing I'll say is I think there are like 40 different other frog decks. I think the frog engine is so good that any frog deck, like you could literally throw anything in there as long as it's not completely moronic and it's like tier 1.5. So I'm going to save us some time. I'm not going through 18 different frog decks. Any frog deck at a bare minimum is tier 1.5. They're just so good and they support Caius, which is ridiculous. It should have never been printed. Frog Hero, I think, is the best variant, and I would put it as a tier 1 deck. I think it is the premier control deck of the format. I think it's very consistent. I think, if you do 10 test hands with frogs, like there's a very, very good opener almost all of the time. Your deck gets in motion almost immediately. You have a pathway for Miracle Fusion, usually within just a few turns, very, very easily. You can play from hand. Um, it's just a really, really good deck. The main thing I think it has is oppression issues and potentially deck dev issues. Now, I do think hero frogs are being built a little bit suboptimally, and I think a few players are catching on to that, and they're running more traps, whether or not that's just like a simple mirror force, or adding more to discard traps and cutting out shit like the faders, which makes you a lot more resilient to deck dev. So I think frogs are in a really, really good spot right now, hero frogs. I just think there are some deck building errors happening, and I think cards like Upstart, just for those filler spots, rather than running really shitty suboptimal cards, are going to be more important moving forward. Um, and with my comment on oppression and deck dev, another point I want to make is I do think the format is moving forward almost solely going to be defined by oppression and deck dev. In my mind, I don't think any deck that just hard loses to oppression or deck dev can be above tier 1.5. It probably has to be tier 1.5 or below. below. Like I just there's no world where you can have like a huge weakness to those cards and not just be below these tiers. I also think, you know, it's really great if your deck isn't largely affected by those cards, but it's even better if you can not be affected by them and run them. So that's going to give you a little sneak peek on, some of the tiers moving forward and some of the decks. But a recurring theme throughout this video is there's going to be a lot of decks that just hard lose to those, and they just can't unfortunately move above tier 1.5. It's just crazy how powerful those cards are. All right, so Diva Hero. I think this is a good deck, and I will try to order these within tiers as much as I can. Um, well, I guess we'll have to sort them out once I get more stuff in here. But this is like the premier good stuff pile in Edison. People say that's value turbo, but that's not true. Like if you just took the 40 most powerful cards in Edison format, less Black Whirlwind, and you put them in a deck, it just is a Diva Hero like deck list. Like you just play all of the busted cards. The issue is consistency, and the other issue is oppression, um, and that's what puts it in tier 1.5. Next is Disaster Dragon. I think this deck is actually very bad, namely the Totem version. I don't think there's any reason at all to play the Totem version, but I will give credit where credit's due. Rob the Man has been playing the like hamster Raikou version, and I think the deck is very good. In fact, it's probably better than Diva Hero. And it's definitely better than most Frog variants. So yeah, this deck's really good. You get to run a lot of very broken cards. You get to run a lot of the stupid dark shit that just blows up the format. You get to run Hamster Raikou Caius. You get to run Return. You can slot in deck devs. It just has oppression issues, but the deck is very good. Like the way I see it, it is a better Hamster Raikou Caius deck than Vayu Turbo. The thing that's holding it back is just oppression. So, like, I mean, think about it. Like the payoff for like a Wyvern plus Red Bed Mill is like so substantially higher than uh, like anything that's going to be milled with Vayu Turbo. Plus, you can still run stuff like Plague Spreaders and whatever else you might want to mill. Um, the other thing is uh, Vayu Turbo gets to run Greffer, and Vayu Turbo also gets to run Arma, which are huge enablers. So just as like a pure mill deck, a Hamster Raikou Caius mill deck, like Dragon Control just is better, but it doesn't have as many support cards, and it has oppression issues. But the deck's very powerful. Next up, let's do X Saber. It's as my friend James Ark would say, ass. Um, Machina Control. This is like one of my favorite decks. It's not very good, unfortunately. Sadly, it's just a worse Hamster Raikou Caius deck than Bayou Turbo by like a lot. The payoffs just aren't that good. Um, Popular cards just completely ruin it. Like Rug fucks you. Um, Deck Dev can fuck you. Uh, like Chimera Tech Oppression can in certain spots. Like Cyber Dragon Omega fucks you. Like these are all cards that are already in everyone's sides. Unfortunately, like Crow fucks you when you try to Avarice. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think any machine deck can be. I don't think any machine deck can honestly be above tier two. Like Cyber Dragon and like Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon were just like game design errors in my opinion. There's no reason for like one archetype to be gate kept so hard by the most fucking busted side card ever. It's just really, really bad game design. If I could go back in time and undo that, I would. I'd love for this to be an S tier deck, but that's just not reality. Lightsworns, I think, are very good. Um, I think it is a Saki deck. Um, you rely on luck more than your average deck. I don't think it's as good as most Frog variants, but like just milling wolves and like the uh, the versions that are playing like 3 wolves, like I just think it's really good. And you get to play Honest, you get to play Judgment Dragon. It's just a good deck. I think there are better Lightsworn variants, which we'll get into, but people do like to shit on Lightsworn just because it is like the outcome of games is kind of just a dice roll a lot of the times, but like this deck can really run you over. Um, so yeah, Fish OTK. I actually don't really have like a super great opinion on this. I'm just gonna put it in tier two. I don't know, quite frankly. Amaryllis. I actually think this deck is pretty darn good. I'd probably put it above Lightsworn and like on par with most Frog variants. The thing about Amaryllis, which I really, really like, is that it does something different than other decks in terms of its win condition, and it forces your opponent to play into like what your win condition is. Um, like if you're playing, like for instance, a control deck, like your control deck is just worse than Frog Hero. But Amaryllis has a very, very unique game plan, since it combines some like mill stuff and like board control and like negate type stuff with Titanial, plus like a burn package. So I think this deck is really good, and it forces your opponent to play differently. Because certain game plans are gonna be like, oh, I play for card advantage, and it's like you can't just play for pure card advantage versus Amaryllis. You're just gonna be burned out very quickly. So it forces your opponent to play with that game plan in mind. Same thing with Chainburn. Like I think Chainburn is very underplayed. People do not have a plan for it. Nobody plays a Royal Decree. And again, it forces opponents that aren't that good to probably make a lot of mistakes. Because if you play against a Chainburn deck and you're not just going like full aggro, you're just gonna lose. And like I see people playing against Chainburn and they're making like card advantage plays. It's like, why are you going for card advantage and delaying yourself from like game shots by like 1 to 2 turns? It makes no sense. So I think it can really stop like bad players that just don't understand how to play against alt wins, which goes for like even like Dragon Turbo. Like you just have to understand how play to their win con and what their lose con is, which is not conventional. Um, Gemini, I think this is a tier two deck. It likes the popular or dies to popular side hate, which is unfortunate. Machina Gadget, I think, is also quite bad. I mean, this loses even harder to popular side deck stuff. Like Rug really, really hurts this deck. Deck Dev is a complete nightmare. Um, Cyber Dragon again is like nightmare on steroids, so it's unfortunate. Dark Calling I think is pretty ass. Sadly, it just does everything that a Miracle Fusion deck does, but worse. The payoffs are worse. The cards are worse. You have less support. Um, just the individual card quality isn't all that great. Instant Zombie, I think, is a tier 2 deck. I don't think it's the best zombie variant. It just loses too hard to Oppression, sadly. GB combo. So here is the first deck that I want to talk about, which I'm very uncertain about. So this deck, um, if you would have asked me this 3 weeks ago, I would have said this is an ass tier deck because my win rate against Gladiator Beast is probably like 90%. Like I can't remember the last time that I've lost to this deck, but Spiral just won uh, the RBET with this deck, and just watching his replays, like I don't know if he's onto like a different build or he's just that good of a player, but I mean it really really looked like a tier one deck. I mean he was just going off. So I really do want to hold my reservations. Like if there's something that I think I'm going to be very very wrong about, it might be Gladiator Beasts, just because like it really looked like fucking magic. Like he was just had the magic touch. It was nuts. Like if you can just try to watch his replays and check out his deck, and hopefully some people can play Gladiator Beast just because I think it's a cool deck. It just loses to Oppression really hard. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know how he did so well with it. It's pretty crazy. Um, all right, let's do the fairy stuff. I think this is good. I'll just kind of cover some of my thoughts on fairies in general. I think they're a very strong archetype. I think they have a few things going for them, which a lot of other decks can't boast, which is that they can play from hand and they can play hand traps. Um, if you didn't know already, traps in Edison are fucking terrible. They're absolutely dog shit. Um, but hand traps are completely busted. If I could take my Vayu Turbo deck or my Blackwing deck and convert every single trap in that deck into a hand trap, I would in an instant. Even if those hand traps were slightly worse. Hand traps are just fucking insane. because there are very few ways to interact with hand in Edison. So any hand trap, in my mind, should probably just straight up be on the ban list, unless it's like DD Crow power level. But like when you get to play shit like Honest, you can recur Honest. When you get to play shit like Herald, and you can recur Herald, and it's fucking crazy. These decks are very strong. I do think the Pure Fairy is probably the worst of them. In fact, I'd probably put it in tier two. I just don't think it does. It just I just don't think it does enough unfair things. These two decks do. So I think Christiasworn and Fairy Chaos are both very, very powerful decks. In terms of where they go, uh, I don't know. I'm trying to think like which one I think is better, just because they're both so. I'll probably put them next to each other. I think they're definitely better than Chainburn. I think they're better than. I think Amaryllis is better than most Frog variants, and I do think, like independently, these decks probably are better than your average Frog variant, just because this is meant to again be just your average Frog variant. Um, I think they're very, very good. I just think they're not played enough. Um, and there are just like hand loop things that you have to learn, and they're like kind of very difficult to master. Like with recycling Christias and stuff, and like managing your grave is very hard in this deck. Both of these decks. So I don't think Fairy Chaos or Christia Sworn is like necessarily better or worse. Like I just tie these basically. But I think Amaryllis does edge it out in this case. Right. So next up, let's grab Hybrid, Blackwing Hybrid. I don't like this deck at all. I think it does both things that both Blackwings and Vayu does, but worse, and it makes it brickier. I don't think this deck is worth playing. Like if you're going to commit to Blackwings, just commit to Blackwings, and if you want to do Greffer Vayu stuff, just Vayu does it better. So I really don't like the deck. Actually, you know what? This ordering is a little bad. I think Diva here is better than Lightsworn Pure. Yep, there we go. Let me just double check this. Disaster, Machina Control. Machina Control's gotta be better than Disaster Dragon. Machina Gadget's definitely GB combo. I don't know. All right, cool. Next up, let's see what we're grabbing here. Let's just do some of the lower tier stuff. Alien's really bad. Uh, Quick Draw Plants, it's definitely a tier 2 deck. Quick Draw Dandy Warrior, more or less. It's probably like in here. It loses to Oppression. It loses to Deck Dev. It's a very cool deck, but it's just not very good, unfortunately. Um, Diva Hero Beat. So I have two variants here. This Hero Beat stun version is meant to stand in for the Seer version, and the Diva Hero Beat is, of course, Diva Hero Beat. So Um, I think this deck does a few things very, very well, and there are reasons to play it, which I'm going to get into. I don't think it bleeds into tier one though. Um, and this is a change in tune from some of my other opinions. Um, I think it actually has more consistency issues than I originally thought, which is why I will rate the Seer version um, at the top of tier 1.5, and then Diva Hero Beat below that. Um, First of all, because of consistency issues. Second of all, because Diva Hero Beat does have rug issues and oppression issues, which are in everyone's side deck. Well, not oppression, but rug is, and then oppression is in a lot of side decks for bird decks. Um, so yeah, I think that's like the main issue with it. But I will give it some credit. So what I really do like about Hero Beat, of course, is that it is good into Blackwings, which I think are going to only get more popular. It's hard to side against, and side cards that you would run against it probably just aren't worth running in your side anyway. Like, you should not have like a deep plan for Hero Beat. Like, if you have a side plan for Hero Beat, more than like maybe a card that like gets dual coverage in other matchups, like you're just building your side deck wrong. Like you have absolutely no reason to side deck for this, just because the side deck cards are so ineffective, which I think is very powerful. I think it's probably in the top two going second decks in the format, just because you do get cards that can play from hand, like Gemspark, like Honest. So I think like these two hero beats, well, namely the Seer version, a lot more so than Diva Hero Beat, are very good going second relative to other decks. Um, the issue that I have with it is that it has basically no ceiling. Um, you just don't steal games with this deck, unfortunately. It doesn't have win buttons like Dark Armed, like Deck Dev, like Oppression, like Return from the Different Dimension, like Black Whirlwind. Like all of those are kind of just win buttons. You have consistency issues because like Frog, for instance, can cycle like 9 to 10 cards out of their deck very, very early in the game with Substitute, and then you just draw straight gas for the rest of the game. Um, so the other issue that I have with this deck is I think a lot of the synergies are one way. So what I mean by that is like think about like Blackwing. Like let's just take Bora because it's the picture here. Like Bora has like a surface area of synergies, like multi-dimensional synergies, which are like it can inherent summon itself when you have another Blackwing. So that's one synergy. It synergizes with game shot pumps, like through defense monster stuff with Sirocco. It synergizes with Black Whirlwind, of course. It synergizes with Blizzard. It's like good with Icarus attack. So like this card alone has like 5 to 7 or whatever it is, like different synergies with a bunch of other cards in your deck. Um, but like when you think about something like Hero Beat, like think about like Honest. It's like okay, Honest is just used for Alias basically, unless you run like a Cyber Dragon or a DD Warrior Lady. Gemspark is only good with Alias. Hero Blast is only good with Alias. So a lot of the synergies are just very one way. So you kind of get into situations where if you don't draw like a very strong hand with Hero Beat decks, your deck just kind of like gets really clunky. And I just don't think if you're going to be running a clunky build, you can afford not to have auto win buttons. Like at least with clunky builds like Diva Hero over here, at least you have win buttons like that you can just automatically win very easily a lot of the time. So um, I think the Blackwing matchup saves it. I think some of my thoughts on going second and the side decking thing save it. But I do think it is in a distinct tier below S and 1. Okay. Next, looks like we're saving the best for last here. Diva Zombie, I think this is probably, I think it's probably better than Dragon Control and Amaryllis. This deck is really good. It just suffers a lot of the same issues, unfortunately, like Rug and Oppression. So I don't think it can ever really move above tier 1.5. It's a very cool deck and has one of the highest ceilings. I do think it's a little bit more consistent for Diva Hero or than Diva Hero. Um, and it has a very comparable ceiling. So I just think it's probably one of the better like pop-off decks of the format. All right, and we are saving the best for last. So Dragon, let's do the James Arc deck. So the James Arc deck, I think this is one of the best decks in the format. The thing about Vayu Turbo, aka the James Arc deck, is that it's very, very flexible. Um, a lot of the top tier decks are either like the premier control deck, the premier aggro deck, or the premier uh, combo deck, and I'll get into those in a second. But um, I think Vayu is for the most part solved, and it's being built way better than most other top tier decks. It can run oppression in deck dev. It's not weak to oppression. It's slightly weak to deck dev. If you're going second, darks are busted in this format. Like think about like how Konami designed darks, and think about like what other archetype or attribute support like there is. Like darks get dark armed dragon, they get allure, they get grepher, they get arma. What are some other ones? They get deck dev. They get dark and dragon. They're even resilient to fucking catastor. Like I just cannot believe like they just were like, yeah, darks are just gonna be like tier 0. Like darks are there's no other game in town. Like darks are it. Like they didn't give any other support to any other attributes, which is really funny. Um, Now I do not think that Vayu is in a tier of its own. There's gonna be another deck up here that I'm gonna put next to it. Um, and I'll explain my reasoning for that. I think Vayu's been on an absolute tear recently. Um, but I think that's for a few reasons. First is that frogs have been falling in popularity, and I think this deck has a very, very difficult time with frogs. Um, I also um, think that I'm trying to think of like the best way to say this, but I don't want to say it's being like undersided for, but like I just feel like the flex spots in people's side decks aren't being used like properly. Like I don't see any real reason why if people weren't on like 1 to 2 more like crows or compulses in their side, that Value Turbo doesn't like get very, very hurt by that. I'm not saying you need like 2 crow, like 2 compulse, but those cards are like good in other matchups. So it's not like you have to like carve out a portion of your side for like Value Turbo specifically. But I just don't think people's sides are being built like with enough respect for this deck at this point. Um, it's a really good deck, and I think its most resilient quality is that it is flexible. You can play the aggro game with this deck. You can play the grind game and the card advantage game in certain matchups, or you can just play the soft combo game. And it reminds me a lot of Chaos Turbo in GOAT format, where you can kind of tailor a game plan and let the game come to you a little bit. And I think that's Value Turbo's biggest strength, which is that in the hands of a good pilot, they're going to be able to identify those games where they should go like aggro or play slow or somewhere in between. So I think the deck's really good. I think the meta has yet to fully respect it. Um, and I think when that happens, this deck is going to have a significantly harder time. The other weakness that I think this deck has is it is a little slow with the way the meta is developing. I think there's going to be more Blackwing and more Dragon Turbo, and I think the more time you give Value Turbo, the worse it gets for Value Turbo. So yeah, I really wonder what the future of this deck looks like if the meta speeds up, because Value Turbo definitely has speed problems because it almost always has to spend the first few turns playing passively, which is a problem with super trap heavy decks and the Hamster Raikou Caius engine as a whole. So those are my thoughts on Value. Next is Dragon Turbo. Here is the deck that I was talking about that I am the most uncertain about. I think this is an insanely powerful deck. One of the biggest issues with it is that it's being underplayed and people aren't playing it that well. I think there are only a handful of players that play this properly and play it well and kind of understand what the deck does. I think it is the premier combo deck. I think Blackwings are the premier aggro deck, and I think Frogs are the premier control deck. I think Value is the premier flex deck. Um, but what I think is going wrong with Dragon Turbo right now is it's super duper hard to play this deck emotionally. Like people say like, oh, like this deck creates a bunch of non-games, like you really must hate your opponent. But the thing with Dragon Turbo is like, yeah, the games you win with like a super wombo combo are non-games usually, but there are an equal amount of non-games for the user of Dragon Turbo. There are a ton of hands where you just cannot play the game. You draw like a bunch of like discard spells and no targets, and then you draw like a magical stone excavation. And if you're playing against a good player, they're just going to normal summon shit and then like attack you, and that's game over in like 2 to 3 turns. Um, and like I think the thing that differentiates a good Dragon Turbo player versus someone that just I guess is mid um, is not like how the combos work. Like everyone thinks like, oh, you must be like so smart to like know all these like different wombo combos with Dragon Turbo. Like that's super duper easy. Like if you watch 10 Dragon Turbo replays, you're going to have 95% of the combos that you need to know memorized, and you go on with your life. What's really hard with this deck is those games where you draw like either a bad hand or like a below average hand and making the judgment call that you're not going to be able to combo off. What I've noticed like players like Ghost Rider doing is they'll just like rather than like trying to like keep their fingers crossed and pray that they're going to like do a wombo combo like 5% of the time and maybe win that game is they'll just basically set up something like a decree and a red med and then like bring out like a Primat, or they'll just like go in raw with a red med and like have a desperation play. And for like whatever percentage of those games where you draw a really, really shitty hand is, like let's just say it's 40%. I don't know what the number is, but like you draw like 40% of the time like a really shitty hand, being able to have like a 25% win rate of those games is where the good Dragon Turbo players shine. Like anyone can play Dragon Turbo and get a 50% win rate and just wombo combo. Like it's really not that hard. Like you're just going to draw enough like nuts hands where you can get like 45, 50% win rate, like not even looking at your screen. It just, the deck's built that way. But if you want to get in like the 60s in terms of that percentage of win rate, you have to take all those games that are seemingly unwinnable and make that choice to have a different game plan. And that's where I think people are missing the ball on this is Dragon Turbo is a lot more flexible in terms of its game plan than people give it credit for. But people like to lose harder. And what I mean by that is like in those 40% of games that seem unwinnable, people would rather just sit in hand and like just wait and like activate a reckless greed and then like try to pull off like 5% of the time like a wombo combo and be like, yeah, like I came back. And then like if they lose the 95% of the time, they're like, oh yeah, I bricked anyway, because it's just easier to like blame it on a brick. It's a lot harder to make a play like just summoning a red bed into back row and just hoping it sticks and you can win the game when you know that's only going to win you the game like 20 or 25% of the time. And like taking the embarrassment of that and just being like, why didn't you like, because like if you're playing in war, like your teammates are going to be like, well, why didn't you go for like the full combo? And like people are going to watch your replay and be like, that play was really bad, like you got punished. But like that's what's difficult. Like you have to stand out and actually make plays where you stick your neck out and just go in raw and that seem incorrect, but give you a higher ex ante win rate than just like hoping that you draw the nuts next turn. And I think Ghost Rider does a really, really good job of that. And most of the other players that I've seen playing this deck, like they just throw the game away. It's like, you draw a shit hand and you just sit there doing nothing. Like you have to do something. So I think the best Dragon Turbo players, like if there are more that come in the meta, are going to be the ones with the meta deck and game experience that know when there's like that critical mass of dog shit in your hand where you just have to make desperation plays and try to win that 1 in 4, you know, chance. Um, so yeah, those are my thoughts on Dragon Turbo. Last but not least, everyone's favorite is Blackwings. So this and Value Turbo are the two best decks in the format. I think these are interchangeable. I don't think like Value Turbo is better than Blackwing or anything like that. Um, I mean, what can you say? I mean, it's the premier aggro deck of the format. Like if you play other decks and then you play this deck, it's like fucking like Rock Lee taking his weights off. You're just like just it's just like crazy. Like you just this was a like one of the first decks that was like a specific archetype. Um, because like when you look at most other decks, like these are hand built by the community. Uh, Blackwings was hand built by Konami, so like they made it as busted as possible to sell cards. It's really really good. It's resilient to deck dev and oppression, and you can run them. You get free wins. You get to run uh, the most broken cards in the format, which are Black Whirlwind and Dark Armed. Like Blackwings is, a Whirlwind Dad sack deck for the most part. I do think this is going to get even better, just because I think Blackwings is being built very wrong. Um, I see people running the Blackwing core, and then they fill the rest of like cards 35 through 40 with complete dog shit. They're running Book of Moons. They're running Legacy of Yatagarasus. They're running all kinds of other shit that makes absolutely no sense in Blackwings. In my opinion, like run 3 upstarts, run My Body as a shield, and then you can have fun with your like 40th card. Go at it. But to run reactive draw power in a proactive deck, it makes no sense. Like there's just no world in my mind where not running 3 upstarts and not running like My Body as a shield is not correct. Like you have to be able to play that like those cards. Because Blackwings needs to play from hand. Like I think another card that is really underused is Nobleman of Extermination. This is a proactive deck that will completely get its shit pushed in if you don't stick a normal summon. So you want to play from hand, and you want to be able to see your cards that enable you to play from hand one turn early, which is why you run Upstart. Believe me, guys, if you cut one Icarus attack, your Book of Moons, and just run 3 Upstart, a My Body as a Shield, and Noble Moon at Exterm, just try it for 5 games. Just try it for 5 games, and you will never go back. You will never go back. It's so much better than the legacy bullshit. It's like it's not even close. So I think once people figure that out, um, Blackwings are going to get even better. I think Vayu Turbo over time actually is going to get even worse. I think where we stand again today, Frog Hero is going to get even better, and Dragon Turbo is going to get even better. Once people kind of just figure it out. Just because I think like Vayu Turbo is as optimized as it's going to be. There are no innovations that are going to happen. Mark my words. Frog Hero, there's still a lot being done incorrectly. Um, so builds can improve. Blackwings are being built wrong. Dragon Turbo, I think the deck list is solved, but I think the play and the side decking and the play style is not solved. So if we get some good players coming in, Dragon Turbo could be a fucking menace, and I'm not looking forward to it. So that's really all I have to say about it, guys. Let me know what some of your thoughts are, or if you think my head is up my ass. Um, but thanks for tuning in. I know it was a bit of a long one. See you later.